There is a state in the middle of this country that most people think they understand. They think of Chicago, they think of deep dish pizza and lakeshore drives and traffic that makes grown adults weep into their steering wheels. But drive 4 hours south of all that and you will find a different Illinois entirely. An Illinois where entire downtowns have gone dark, where courthouses sit empty on bluffs above rivers that nobody is watching anymore, and where you can buy a house, a real house, with walls and a roof and your name on the deed for less than $5,000. And the crazy part is not the price. The crazy part is what the price is trying to tell you. Number 10, Royalton, Franklin County. Franklin County sits in the southern part of Illinois in a region that locals call Little Egypt, which sounds like a tourism slogan somebody invented in 1982 and never took down. The name actually predates that by about a century and a half, rooted in a combination of biblical geography comparisons and the fact that the southern tip of Illinois sits between two great rivers the way ancient Egypt sat between its own. It is a poetic name for a region that has not had much to be poetic about in quite some time. Royalton is a small incorporated village in Franklin County with a population that the last census counted at around 1,100 people, down from considerably more during the decades when coal was the reason anyone lived here at all. Franklin County was one of the most productive coal-producing counties in Illinois during the early 20th century, and Royalton grew up around that industry the way all these towns did. The mine employed the men. The company store employed the women, more or less. The school employed whoever was left, and everybody else just held on. The mines closed. Not all at once, which would have been merciful in its own brutal way, but in that slow, grinding, decade-by-decade fashion that never lets a town fully grieve because it keeps almost surviving. By the time the last significant coal employment left Franklin County, Royalton had already lost a generation of young people to Carbondale and Springfield and Chicago and anywhere that had a job posting that did not involve going underground. Today, you can find homes in Royalton listed between $4,000 and $12,000. Some of them are small frame houses with covered porches and yards that somebody's grandmother spent 40 years tending. The bones are there. The problems are also there. Old wiring, old plumbing, foundations that have settled into the southern Illinois clay in ways that inspectors describe with carefully neutral language. Franklin County's median household income sits around $31,000 a year, and the poverty rate runs well above the state average. There is a Dollar General. There is always a Dollar General. Carl would look at a Royalton listing and say it has potential. Carl says that about everything. I have started to wonder if Carl knows what potential means or if he just likes the word. Number 9, Pittsburgh, Williamson County. Before we talk about Pittsburgh, we need to talk about Williamson County because Williamson County has a history so violent and strange that it earned a nickname that the locals have spent the better part of a century trying to shake. They called it Bloody Williamson. And they did not call it that because of a metaphor. In the 1920s, Williamson County was the site of the Heron Massacre, in which a labor dispute at a coal mine ended with the deaths of nearly 20 men in a single afternoon. It was also the center of Ku Klux Klan activity so organized and politically entrenched that the Klan essentially ran local government for a period. And if that were not enough, it became the battleground for one of the most violent bootlegging wars in the Midwest during Prohibition. Charlie Berger and the Shelton brothers ran competing criminal operations through this county with the enthusiasm that would have been impressive if it had not been so murderous. Charlie Berger was the last man publicly hanged in Illinois in 1928, and by all accounts, he went to the gallows with considerably more dignity than most of the situations he had created in life. Pittsburgh is a small community in Williamson County that grew up on coal and has been shrinking ever since the coal left. The population is somewhere around 400 people, a number that declines a little more with every census in that quiet, undramatic way that is somehow sadder than a dramatic collapse. Properties here can be found for $5,000 to $15,000. The houses are a mix of company-era structures and mid-century additions, most of them modest, some of them barely standing. Williamson County has better employment than some of its neighbors, anchored partly by Marion, the county seat, which has managed to attract some commercial development, but Pittsburgh itself sits outside that modest orbit of activity, close enough to see the lights and far enough to feel the dark. Number 8, El Dorado, Saline County. The name El Dorado means the golden one in Spanish. It is a name historically applied to mythical cities of unimaginable wealth that explorers spent centuries and countless lives trying to find. Whoever named this particular community in Saline County either had a magnificent sense of irony or had not yet learned how the story usually ends. El Dorado, Illinois, population around 3,800, was once a legitimate regional hub for southeastern Illinois. It had a hospital, which sounds like a small thing until a region loses it and realizes that a hospital is not a building. It is the entire infrastructure of health and safety, and the reason that families with children and aging parents choose to stay somewhere instead of leave. Saline County lost its hospital. The Farrell Hospital closed in 2018 after years of financial struggles that reflect a national pattern of rural hospital collapse, so common it has its own terminology now. Critical access hospital closure, that is the polite phrase. The honest phrase is, the nearest place to have your heart attack is now 40 minutes away, and 40 minutes is a long time. Property values in El Dorado reflect this reality with the precision of a particularly grim calculator. Homes sell for $8,000 to $22,000. Some are brick ranches from the 1960s that look like they have been waiting for someone to come back and turn the lights on. Others are older still, coal-era homes with plaster walls and hardware that nobody manufactures anymore. Saline County's median household income sits around $33,000, and the poverty rate hovers around 20%. El Dorado still has a main street. It still has businesses, some of them the kind that survive by serving the people who have not yet left. But the trajectory is clear, and trajectories in southern Illinois tend to point in one direction. Gladys looked at a house in El Dorado online last week and said it reminded her of the house she grew up in. I told her that sometimes that is a good thing and sometimes that is exactly the problem. Number 7, Cairo, Alexander County. Cairo is pronounced Cairo by the people who live there, which used to be considerably more people than it is now. At its peak in the late 19th century, Cairo had nearly 15,000 residents and sat at the confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, the exact spot where the two greatest river systems in North America collide in a tangle of brown water and commerce that once made this place look like the future of the American interior. Ulysses S. Grant used it as a Union Army headquarters. Charles Dickens visited in 1842 and hated it, which he documented with the special enthusiasm that Victorian Englishmen reserved for American cities that let them down. Mark Twain wrote about it. The whole country knew Cairo's name, and for a while that was enough. Then the railroads rerouted. The river commerce migrated. The floods came because Cairo sits inside a ring of levees so extensive that the city feels less like a city and more like a very determined bathtub. In 2011, the Army Corps of Engineers deliberately breached a levee upstream to save Cairo, flooding 50,000 acres of Missouri farmland in the process. The people of Cairo watched the water rise and understood what they had always known. Their city's survival had never been guaranteed. It had always been negotiated. The population today is around 1,500, down 90% from that peak. The downtown is architectural grief made physical. Beautiful 19th century buildings stand empty and crumbling. There is a Safeway that closed in 1984 that locals still use as a landmark. A grocery store that shut before most current residents were born is still giving directions. Houses sell for $3,000 to $15,000. Victorian homes with original woodwork and 12-foot ceilings go for $20,000 or less. Cairo is extraordinary and exhausted in equal measure. Go with your eyes open and leave your expectations at the levee. Number 6, Coulterville, Randolph County. Randolph County is one of the oldest counties in Illinois. Established in 1795 when Illinois was not yet a state, and the whole enterprise of American settlement west of the Appalachians was still very much an argument rather than a conclusion. Coulterville sits in the middle of it, an incorporated village with a population of around 1,000 people, give or take whoever left since the last count. Coulterville was a coal and farming town, which in southern Illinois is essentially the same sentence said two different ways because the communities that coal built were surrounded by the farmland that predated it and outlasted it, barely. The mine employment is long gone. The farming that remains is consolidated into operations that require fewer and fewer people every decade as the equipment gets larger and the profit margins get thinner and the young people do the math and decide the numbers do not add up in their favor. Homes in Coulterville list for $5,000 to $14,000. Some come with parcels of land attached, small lots that back up to fields that go on longer than your eye wants to follow. The village still has basic services, a fact worth mentioning because basic services in communities this small are not guaranteed. Randolph County's median income is around $40,000, which is better than some of the counties on this list, which tells you something about how low the floor on this particular list actually is. The challenge in Coulterville is not one dramatic catastrophe. It is the slow, unspectacular decline of a place that was never going to make the history books, but used to be exactly what its residents needed it to be. That version of Coulterville is mostly gone. What remains is the outline of it pressed into the streetscape like a fossil. Number 5, Dongola, Union County. I want to be straightforward about something before we talk about Dongola. Some of the places on this list are declining. Dongola has essentially already declined and is now in the phase where it is figuring out what comes next, which is a polite way of saying it has not figured it out yet. Union County sits in the far southern end of Illinois, in a part of the state where the terrain starts doing things that the rest of Illinois does not do. The flat agricultural plains give way to hills and hollows and the beginnings of the Shawnee National Forest, which is genuinely beautiful and genuinely remote in equal measure. Dongola is a village of around 700 people that has been losing population since before most people alive today were born. The median household income in Union County is around $38,000, but Dongola's numbers run lower than the county average in the way that the smallest and most forgotten places always run lower than the averages that are supposed to represent them. There is no hospital in Dongola. There is no hospital close to Dongola. The nearest emergency room is in Anna, the county seat, which is about 15 miles away on roads that are manageable in summer, and a different proposition entirely in an ice storm. Properties in Dongola sell for $4,000 to $11,000. There are houses on Main Street that have been empty long enough for the trees in the front yards to grow into the gutters. There are buildings that the village would like to demolish and cannot afford to. There are people who have lived here their entire lives and cannot imagine living anywhere else, and there are young people who grew up here and cannot imagine staying. Both of those things are true simultaneously, and neither one cancels the other out. Chad says he once looked up Dongola because he liked the name. He said it sounded like somewhere in East Africa. He is not entirely wrong. There is a Dongola in Sudan. I did not tell him that because Chad would spend the next 45 minutes explaining how he had always wanted to visit Africa, and somehow we would end up talking about a truck he once owned. Number 4, Pulaski County. Here is a fact that takes a moment to settle in. Pulaski County, Illinois, is named after Casimir Pulaski, the Polish military commander who served in the American Revolutionary War and died at the Siege of Savannah in 1779. Illinois has a state holiday in his honor. Children get a day off school, and the county bearing his name is one of the poorest, most depopulated, most economically distressed counties in the entire state of Illinois. I do not know what Casimir Pulaski would make of this. I suspect he had enough to deal with at Savannah. Pulaski is the county seat of Pulaski County, which is itself remarkable given that the town has a population of somewhere around 200 people. That is not a county seat. That is a county suggestion. The courthouse still stands because courthouses always outlast the economies that built them. It is a fact of American civic architecture that the most permanent structures in a declining small town are always the courthouse and the Dollar General. Pulaski County borders Alexander County, which means it shares the flood geography, the economic history, and the demographic trajectory of one of the most distressed corners of the Midwest. The county's poverty rate exceeds 30%. The median household income is somewhere in the low 20s, a number so far below the national median that comparing them starts to feel like a category error. Houses in Pulaski sell for $3,000 to $10,000. Some of them have not had a paying resident in years. The infrastructure that exists does so on a budget that requires constant triage, deciding which road gets patched this year and which one waits, which pipe gets replaced and which one leaks into next year's problem. If you buy here, you are not buying into a community on the way up. You are buying into a community that is working very hard just to stay level, and level in Pulaski County is a genuine achievement. Number 3, Shawneetown, Gallatin County. Shawneetown has a story so strange and so thoroughly Midwestern in its particular kind of tragedy that I am going to need you to stay with me for a moment because this one takes a turn. Old Shawneetown was one of the first permanent American settlements in Illinois. It sits on the east bank of the Ohio River and was established as a federal land office in 1812, which means that for a period in the early 19th century, virtually every American who wanted to settle in Illinois had to pass through Shawneetown to do it. It was the Ellis Island of the Illinois frontier, which is a comparison that sounds grandiose until you understand that it is essentially accurate. The town reportedly turned down a loan request from a young city called Chicago in the 1830s, on the grounds that Chicago was too far from Shawneetown to ever amount to anything. That story may be embellished. The humiliation, however, is historically consistent. The Ohio River flooded Shawneetown repeatedly, catastrophically, and without apology. The flood of 1937 was the final argument. The federal government relocated the town 5 miles inland and built what is now called New Shawneetown. Old Shawneetown still exists technically, with a population of around 200 people who stayed on the floodplain by choice, which is either an act of profound attachment to place or a decision that meteorologists would describe using different language. New Shawneetown has a population of around 1,200 and serves as the Gallatin County seat. Gallatin County's median household income sits around $30,000, and the poverty rate runs above 22%. Properties in both Shawneetown's old and new can be found for $5,000 to $18,000. The old town's properties come with the additional feature of sitting in a federally designated floodplain so serious that obtaining flood insurance requires a conversation that starts with how much and ends with how soon can you leave. Buying an old Shawneetown is not just a real estate decision, it is a philosophical position about your relationship with a river that has not once in recorded history cared about your property values. Number 2, Kincaid, Christian County. Kincaid was built by the Peabody Coal Company in 1913 and 1914, which means it was not so much a town that grew up around a mine as it was a mine that grew a town around itself. There is a difference, and the difference matters because when the entity that built your town decides it no longer needs your town tends to find out what it is actually made of. Peabody built everything in Kincaid: the houses, the streets, the water system, the infrastructure, all of it constructed by a coal company that needed somewhere to put its workers and was efficient enough to build that somewhere from scratch. The houses were solid because even coal companies understood that workers in falling down houses are workers who call in sick. They were built in rows on lots of consistent size with a uniformity that tells you immediately that you are in a company town and that someone made a spreadsheet before the first nail went in. The Kincaid mine was once one of the largest coal mines in Illinois. At its peak, the operation employed hundreds of men, and the population of Kincaid swelled to reflect that. Then the coal economics shifted, as they always shift, in the direction of fewer people being needed to produce the same amount of coal, and eventually in the direction of not needing the coal at all, or needing it from somewhere else, somewhere cheaper, somewhere without union contracts and safety regulations that cut into margins. Today, Kincaid has a population of around 1,400 people, which is actually better than many places on this list, but the housing stock tells the story more honestly than the head count does. You can buy a house in Kincaid for $4,000 to $13,000. The Peabody-built homes from 1913 are still there, still standing, still recognizable as the product of an industrial building program that prioritized function over everything else. Some have been maintained with the kind of steady, unglamorous attention that makes a house last a century. Others have not been maintained since the Peabody Coal Company stopped caring, which was a long time ago. Christian County has a median household income around $45,000, which is closer to functional than most of the counties on this list. The county seat, Taylorville, has real commercial infrastructure, but Kincaid sits outside that relative stability the way these towns always do, close enough to see it and far enough to feel the gap. Number 1, Thebes, Alexander County. We end at the bottom of Illinois, where the Mississippi River bends and a courthouse sits on a bluff that has been watching the water since 1848. That is not a metaphor. The Thebes courthouse has literally been standing on that hill for that long, which makes it one of the oldest public buildings in the state, and, by a considerable margin, the most interesting thing in a village of under 400 people. Abraham Lincoln argued cases in that courthouse. Dred Scott was held in its jail cell while being transported, briefly connecting this tiny river village to one of the most consequential legal and moral catastrophes in American history. The building is on the National Register of Historic Places, which means the federal government has officially acknowledged that it matters while doing very little about the fact that the town around it has been emptying out for 50 years. Alexander County is the poorest county in Illinois. The poverty rate exceeds 35%. The median household income sits somewhere in the low 20s. Houses in Thebes sell for $3,000 to $10,000, and some of them have not had a paying resident since a president you would struggle to name was in office. The Mississippi is not a friendly neighbor. Flood insurance in Alexander County can cost more per year than some of these houses cost to buy outright. Read that sentence again. I will wait. And yet the bluffs are extraordinary. The courthouse on the hill is genuinely beautiful. The river at sunset does something to the light that no photograph has ever gotten right. Thebes has history in abundance and almost nothing else. That is the whole story in one sentence, and it is both a tragedy and somehow still a place worth knowing about. Here is what the listings do not tell you about buying property in Illinois ghost towns. The purchase price is almost never the real number. A $4,000 house in Cairo or Pulaski or Thebes needs to be seen as the opening bid in a negotiation with a building that has been losing that negotiation for 20 or 30 years. Roofs in southern Illinois take a particular beating from the combination of summer heat, ice storms, and occasional severe weather that the flat geography does nothing to slow down. Foundations in the river counties deal with soil that expands and contracts with the water table in ways that foundation repair contractors describe with the kind of enthusiasm that should make you nervous. Electrical systems from the 1940s do not meet current code, and insurance companies are aware of this. Title history on these properties is frequently complicated. In towns that went through coal company ownership, housing authority transfers, estate sales, and tax forfeitures over the course of a century, the chain of ownership can develop gaps that title insurance companies approach with great caution and conventional mortgage lenders do not approach at all. In practical terms, this means cash purchases, and it means hiring an attorney who knows Southern Illinois property law before you sign anything, not after. The flood geography of the southernmost Illinois counties is not a minor consideration. It is the central fact of life in Alexander, Pulaski, and Gallatin counties, and it has been reshaping those communities, sometimes literally, for as long as they have existed. After the flooding events of the past 2 decades, FEMA flood maps have been redrawn repeatedly. Properties that were not previously in designated flood zones are now in them, and the insurance costs that follow from that designation can turn a $10,000 house into a $20,000 annual obligation. There is also the matter of what economists call the social infrastructure, which is their way of describing the hospitals, the schools, the grocery stores, the employers, the neighbors, and the general fabric of daily life that makes a place livable rather than merely inhabited. Southern Illinois has been losing social infrastructure for decades. Hospital closures, school consolidations, grocery store departures, employer relocations. Each one of these events is reported as a local news story and then forgotten by everyone who does not live there. But for the people who do live there, each closure is a renegotiation of what their daily life costs and how far they have to drive to have it. The opioid crisis has reached into these communities with the same force it reached into Appalachian Kentucky and rural Wyoming and the Ozarks because the conditions that create addiction, chronic economic stress, physical pain from hard labor, limited healthcare access, geographic isolation, and the particular despair of watching a community you love fail in slow motion. Those conditions do not respect state lines. They follow poverty, and poverty in Southern Illinois is not a new problem. And here is the thing I want you to hold on to after all of that. The people who remain in these places are not there because they failed to leave. Some of them tried to leave and came back because it was home, and home is not always rational. Some of them never left because the roots run deeper than the economics, because their grandparents are buried in the churchyard and their cousins live 3 roads over, and because belonging to a place, genuinely belonging to it, is not something you can replicate in a suburb in Columbus or a neighborhood in Nashville, no matter how many amenities it has. The houses cost what they cost because the market has made an honest assessment of the challenges these communities face. The market is not wrong about the challenges, but the market is also not the whole story. Every $1,000 house in Thebes was somebody's home. Every boarded window in Cairo was once a business that somebody built. Every empty street in Kincaid was once full of children who knew every crack in the sidewalk. The prices are not a real estate opportunity. They are a measurement of how much has been lost. Carl is still looking at listings. He sent me one last Tuesday, a 3-bedroom house in Royalton with a covered porch and a price of $6,500. He said it had good bones. I told him every house in Southern Illinois has good bones. The question is whether the rest of the body is still showing up for work. He did not respond, which means he is still thinking about it. Carl thinks about a lot of things. That is what keeps him interesting. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other, because in some of these places, if you do not, nobody else will.